Hey everyone, so it's a couple days before I'm gonna record the actual video, which is why I look a bit different to how I will probably look when the main bit of the video is up. But what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna practice some drawing. My partner's out at an art class, and I thought, well, I've got a bit of spare time, so why not practice drawing for part of the video? So I've got my paper, I've got my pencil. I've got a tutorial to follow, and what I'm going to do is try and follow along with the tutorial, and at the end I might show you what I've made. I wouldn't count on it because I'm going to be very embarrassed by the product, but I will deliver a verdict on something related to whether I can or can't draw, in a shocking twist. You might be surprised at the outcome, but I'm going to do that, and I thought it'd be interesting just because of the direction that this video is taking, that I just use the opportunity to practice and to react to the result of my practice. So I'm going to put on some music for you and fast forward through the bit where I'm following the tutorial, and I'll probably put on a bit of music for me. And yeah, I'll catch you all after this sort of sped up bit. Oh God. I can't draw. I just cannot draw. No, no. All right, let's go to the actual video. Let's go to the actual video. Forget about that. Go to the actual video. Hey everyone, it's a couple days later, and yeah, there's a painting of a submarine in the background. So let's just move past it. I didn't paint that, by the way, as you could plainly tell from the thing that I just did. Why did I just open this video with me struggling with something a child could do? Because I can't draw. I just can't, and that bothers me about me. There seem to be a lot of people who are also bothered about that about themselves. I mention this to say, I get it. It sucks to want to express yourself a certain way, but lack the skills to do so. And it can be tempting if something comes along where you can just type in a prompt and get a picture out of it to feel like you've unlocked something. The truth is, in case people are about to say, oh no, SK's melted about AI, that these generative AI models, they're mostly scams. In the same way that crypto is mostly scams, and if the recent reporting is any indication, it's all just an overinflated bubble that didn't deliver on the wild promises of its enthusiasts, which resulted in pretty big financial losses. I've also seen the term Luddite thrown around about people who don't think AI is all it's cracked up to be. That people who see issues with it in terms of stealing people's work or just producing kind of crap work, they're just simply anti-tech and are trying to protect their jobs against the tidal wave of progress that would actually be good for you if you just let it smash into your life. This got me thinking about a lot of things, how hard it is to be creative, but at the same time that we all have some part of us that wants to express ourselves this way. Or it got me thinking about my own work and the videos and my day job and how it feels to be something of a tech pessimist who's entirely reliant on tech. And it's about time that we actually got to grips with what Luddism actually is, because you might have a surprising amount of overlap with what they believed. But before we get into the video properly, I just want to say, please do like and subscribe. Those are the easiest ways to help the channel out. It just helps me get seen in the algorithm, I think. Who knows how it really works. But yeah, it would be much appreciated. I wanted to think about tools. It may be a bit of a different way than you might expect. And actually try to empathize a little bit with AI bros who maybe feel a little sensitive when they're criticized for this. Up front, I want to say a big part of this is because AI, like crypto, replicates community for a lot of people that have been atomized and isolated. You can see this in the way that they talk to each other, like they're encouraging each other all the time. But it always feels a little bit hollow, like it's an act, especially when you realize they're just trying to scam each other at the end of the day. Some of you may not know, but for a couple of weeks, the PC that I used to record and edit everything had some mysterious thing wrong with it. And during that time, I just switched off from content creation and got weirdly into archaeology and paleontology YouTube. And one of the things that came up was this description of humans as obligate tool users. That's not just a fancy way of saying that Keir Starmer's dad could have found a job at any point in human existence. It's telling us that tools are necessary for our survival. If I offered you the hypothetical of being dropped into the wilderness and you had to survive without contact from modern societies, you'd probably map out a few obvious things: find water, a stable source of food, shelter. But when it comes to actually doing those things, you'd almost certainly make or improvise some set of tools. You just wouldn't be able to help it. There's no rip to you, but I'm built differently. We're all built like that. We'd all do it. There's no exception to that rule. One of the other things that I got really taken in by was all of the art that was done in prehistory. There's so many cave paintings, and they're all incredible, and I'll show you a few of my favorites as I talk about this. There's something so humanizing about the fact that even in the distant past, people were going, lions are majestic. Or the fact that this bull is dated to 40,000 years old on the island of Borneo in the Lubang Jeriji Saleh cave. It's one of the, if not the, oldest figurative paintings that we know of. It's just so cool. But the one that really took me in were the number of hand stencils we were making in caves. We made them all over the place, but there's one cave which stood out to me, which was the Cueva de los Manos in Argentina, with all of these hand stencils. It just looks so incredible to me, and it's just such a human thing to do. I'm not 100% on what speaks to me about this, but I just immediately feel connected to the people thousands of years ago who went, check out my handprint, doesn't that look cool? Or perhaps more realistically, that the cave was somewhere important to them and they just wanted to leave a mark of themselves, that they were here. I'm not an expert, I can't speak to why they did this, but I'm just taken in by it. What does this have to do with generative AI? I think that the fact that we can find artistic expression going back so deep into human history tells us something about ourselves. We're creative. It's part of the human condition. I'm creative. You're creative. The guy who's always in front of you at Greg's, who takes forever to order his food, even though he always orders the same thing, is creative. And you can probably tell that that's a real person who really annoys me, but even I have to concede that he is creative. You can also view generative AI as a tool. When we start viewing it like that and understanding that this fundamental part of ourselves just needs to create, I think we can begin to understand a lot of the defensiveness from users of AI. That doesn't mean they're right, but I can see how if you can't draw, like I can't, and you find a tool that makes it easier, it can feel like sneering when people tell you that the work is bad. It is bad, by the way, I'm sorry. If you pay attention to the art produced by these models for more than 10 seconds, even I can spot things that are wrong with them or that I just don't like. Which I think is where this language around democratizing art that I've seen thrown around comes from. If someone who's taken the time to hone a skill and who makes their living with that skill is perceived to sneer at the work that you've produced with the tool that makes it easier for you, it can feel a little like an elite trying to hold on to the market, to their share of the market. And it can even feel a little bit Luddite. That's laughable because if you commission artists, as I do, you know that these people are very rarely anything close to elite. They just have a skill that I don't have, and so I pay them. This is a tangent, but I can see people now saying that they don't have the luxury of time to spend on getting good at drawing and that this is a shortcut, and who's it really hurting? And I'll address some of that later, but I want to address this time element. It's true, time is finite, and we all have things to do. I have to work a 9-to-5 job, that's a pretty huge chunk of the day gone. Then I have videos, streams, a podcast, and this isn't to shamelessly plug those things, but of course, if you're interested, go check out those things in the link tree down below. But to say that the biggest drains on our time are the products of the society around us. If you want to democratize art, the tools already exist. It's pencil, paper, and the abolition of capitalism. Not some tool that's not nearly half as clever as you think it is. I've seen this tendency among some people who have perhaps gotten way too into this stuff to say that this technology is going to lead to an AI takeover or the singularity, or will create an AI overlord that judges us unworthy and purges humanity. First of all, if you believe that last one, all you've done is created a capricious god. I'm not the first person to say this, but this attitude towards AI feels like they're just inventing God for new atheists. Just go to church. or say the Shahada or whatever, and just stop worrying about that and worrying about this. More broadly, if you've come here fearing that we've invented Skynet, relax. When we're talking about AI in this context, we're talking about generative AI. That is an AI that produces text or an image or something like that. It's not in control of nuclear weapons. It's not about to order the Tesla factory to produce the world's shoddiest and rustiest Terminators. It's certainly not going to lead to the singularity. An image generator is not going to improve upon itself autonomously and surpass all collective human intelligence. It's just not that type of thing. Instead, what we're dealing with are models that are trained on data sets. Where do they get their data sets from? Well, that's a question for a bit later. That can take a prompt and generate either a text or an image that conforms to the keywords given in that prompt. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that the things it produces are good. The text-based models have already gotten people into trouble. For example, a lawyer used ChatGPT to write a submission, and ChatGPT just straight up made up cases to cite to include in the brief. The trick is that these models, the things that they produce, are a lot of the time just about good enough that someone somewhere can justify using it instead of a person. Take the example of a person who can't draw. They don't want to commission someone, so the AI can make something that scratches that itch. Never mind what data it's trained on or what resources the AI consumes. If you look at AI consumption of energy, for example, it's extremely power intensive and generally resource intensive too. Not exactly ideal at a time when we should be looking at a reduction in consumption due to climate change. If this is reminding you somewhat of crypto, then there's a pretty good reason for that, because it's a scam funded by largely the same people and groups. You might be thinking, SK, you keep saying that the things that are produced by these models aren't as good as a real person's work, or that it's outright bad. So how are we in a position where it could replace human labor? The answer is, it doesn't need to be good enough, really. If you take our friends the Luddites, the machines they broke largely produced inferior products because they could be used by untrained people, which would be cheaper labor. There's a more qualitative answer. I need to provide some context about myself. I have the great pleasure of working in tech, which might come as a surprise given that I am a bit of a tech pessimist. And being a tech pessimist in tech is a bit of a challenge professionally, especially because I'm technically in an innovation team. One of the things you get in a big company, like the one I work for, is that you get a lot of emails. And so many emails have been about like industry news. And let me tell you, there are times when AI is all over that stuff. Even though I think it has an extremely limited use case for my particular jobs and a lot of the jobs across the company I work for. Part of the reason for this is that in tech and in really all industries, if your competitor adopts something and you have questions about whether it works or is even a moral business practice, but it turns out to be the big idea for the next 10, 15 years and makes your competitor a lot of money, being a pessimist has screwed the company, whose only goal is to make profit, remember. People like me simply do not rise up through the corporate ranks to the positions where they set the tone and direction of the industry. I might, if I'm lucky, get paid a lot of money to be very good at my job and never manage anyone or decide the direction of a company. But being a tech pessimist does put a pretty hard ceiling on how far I can go. You have this toxic optimism mixed with a technology that clearly can do some things to some kind of appropriate standard that maybe if you squint at it is good enough. You know, certainly from the perspective of an optimist, if it's not good enough now, it will become good enough. And in that case, you do need to have the infrastructure in place. In case you think it's just creative work at risk, those of you who, like me, are in the tech sector should be aware and should beware, incidentally, these models, because they absolutely can try to write code. Emphasis on try. It's usually about as good at writing code as it is at drawing hands, and as I am at drawing anything, apparently. We have a new tool, one that could potentially allow people with less specialized training to do certain things. Write stories, draw pictures, code, write legal briefs. So seriously, if you are for some reason a legal professional watching this video, do not use AI to write legal briefs, please. Like, it's just such an obviously stupid idea. It produces inferior work, and anyone who's pessimistic about it could, and often is, labeled a Luddite by advocates for it. But is being a Luddite such a bad thing? I'm not so sure. But I think there's something we can learn from Luddism and from the Luddite struggles, and so that's what the fun part of this video is going to be about. So let's get to the fun part. Wow, I'm really selling this video apparently. Let's talk a little about the Luddites and the way people use the term Luddite. If I were to say the word Luddite to you, the image in your head is probably of a person who's a massive technophobe. Someone who shuns every new technology or any new way of doing something. You might even have the idea that Luddites are primitivists in the style of noted mathematician Ted Kaczynski, or better known for his other work, admittedly. It should go without saying that while there may be thematic overlaps between those types of people and what you think the Luddites were, the Luddites were not mere haters of technology, or people who hated it because they couldn't use it or wouldn't learn how to use it. The original Luddites emerged in the city where I live, Nottingham. In fact, it's left such a legacy that you can see this picture of me that I will probably have taken during the editing process outside a pub called the Ned Ludd, which isn't super relevant to the video, but it is fun. They were textile workers, and they were often skilled operators of the machinery themselves. Hardly the typical image of the classic technophobe who either can't or won't use technology. The Luddites decided to revolt not against technology or an early attempt to get Rage Against the Machine off the ground, that wasn't what they were, but against what the machines represented and what they were. A tool of the industrializing society to undermine and change their way of life. As the book Breaking Things at Work, which I highly recommend, puts it, the Luddite rebellions were never simply against technology, but what that machinery stood for, the palpable daily evidence of their having to succumb to forces beyond their control. And I can't help but look at that and ask you, doesn't that sound awfully familiar? If you think about the kinds of people whose livelihoods could plausibly be threatened by AI, an awful lot of them are technologically savvy. Digital artists are hardly fertile ground for technophobic sentiment, neither are coders, as a couple of examples. If I put the statement, technology isn't inherently good or bad, it's how you use it to you, I think that a lot of the audience would agree with the sentiment behind that. That's a common enough view that I feel confident that even if you have a tech pessimist streak in you, there's a part of you that's like, yeah, that makes sense. To me, though, it feels equivalent to this idea that gets peddled in America whenever there's a mass shooting. That guns don't kill people, people kill people. Which, yeah, but also a person would find it quite a bit more difficult to kill someone if they didn't have a gun. There are also people who say consequences that arise due to technological advancement are either worth the downsides, the downsides can be, it's fine, who cares, or that those downsides will be erased by the gains to wider society that will be made by technological advancement. If you lose your job to generative AI, it'll be fine, because society at large will gain so much from the technology that your personal anguish and insecurity will be offset. And doesn't a rising tide lift all boats? Only this doesn't really accord with our experience of work or with the actual data in the 21st century. To borrow from a Historia Civilis video, work in the 21st century, we work longer hours and have fewer days to ourselves than our recent ancestors. It's a great video, you should check it out. The video for me raises a pretty important question, which is, if I live in the most technologically advanced period of human history, why the fuck do I have to work so much? This isn't the preserve of a particular part of the political spectrum. Viewing technology as morally and politically neutral with the potential to reap massive benefits proliferates from Elon Musk to leftists who seriously propose ideas like fully automated luxury communism, which is the title of an Aaron Bastani book, which, look, that's just way too much for me to get into right now. But the crux of it is, if we embrace technology, it can be utilized to the end of abolishing capitalism, eliminating a large amount of work, and creating unimaginable surplus and luxury. There are flaws in that, some of which might be immediately obvious, but my point isn't to criticize the book so much to show you that even self-identifying leftists have embraced technophilia or ambivalence about whether technology inherently can be a weapon to be wielded against workers and their conditions. It's one thing to view technology as a site of struggle, as the Luddites and Luddism clearly does, but it's another to do something. What did the Luddites do? In 19th century Nottingham, your options were limited, in perhaps a way, the same way that they feel limited to us now. The most effective was break the machines themselves. This wasn't unprecedented. Resistance of this form had taken place in England before the Luddites, but they're the ones we remember. Why? Part of it is the degree of militancy they displayed and the organization, connections they had to other radical movements, the sympathy they had among their own communities, and the fact that Parliament itself had to respond to them with overwhelming force, all contribute towards embedding themselves in our minds today. Luddism itself is not just breaking machines, it's not just secret nighttime attacks on factory owners, and it's not just pissing off the British Parliament, though all of those things are pretty fucking cool. What it is recognizing technology not as this neutral thing that depends on how it's used or can be co-opted for positive ends. Basically, if you're a Luddite, you're never gonna look as much of a dickhead as Oppenheimer was when he realizes that the death ball he invented was used to cause death. I assume that's what happens in the film. I've not watched it, do not correct me. This is not a primitivist position, or the typical technophobia you'd expect from the popular use of the term, but a philosophy that's remarkably flexible, and I would say that's very relevant to the left today. If we are, as we claim, concerned with material conditions, concerned about providing the best way of life for as many people as possible, then skepticism about technology needs to be something that we look at seriously. Once we actually look at Luddism beyond the petty stereotypes and colloquialisms, I think we find a lot of very interesting potential modern parallels. If we accept that a Luddite was a skilled user of machines and technology, then the door is open to everyone watching this video potentially to be a Luddite. What it takes is skepticism about the promise of technology, a bit of tech pessimism, and a desire to not just prevent further imposition of excess production and bad conditions, but to look at the current situation as one where we're not leading the lives that we could be. It's not that we think that we should be hunter-gatherers, or that we should all flounce off to the woods and live there, but that technological progress, production of often inferior products with automation, and therefore consumption for its own sake, is not changing our lives for the better. Again, I refer you back to the question I asked a little while ago. If we're living in the era where humans have the most technology at their disposal, why are we all working longer than our ancestors? But that's not the only question at play. When we're talking about encroachments and damage to our ways of life, it can almost sound conservative and regressive. But when we look at how new technology, both the machines the Luddites broke and the AI that we're talking about in this video, have impacted people, we see why there may be a pretty big overlap between leftist political goals and Luddism itself. The most obvious consequence of the arrival of a new machine that allows untrained people to make inferior products is that people's jobs and livelihoods can be under threat. This isn't anything new as such. Your job is only as safe as your employer allows it to be, within the law of the country you're in, of course. I'm sure they're all totally obeying all of those laws 100% of the time. Anyway, there are two pressures at play that impact two different groups differently. One is to undermine the conditions of a group of people who are already precarious, The other is to introduce precarity to people who we would traditionally see as secure, even if in a lot of these sectors of the economy that's a bit of an outdated view. You need only look at layoffs in a tech sector driven in part by companies believing AI is able to produce something that's just good enough and be substantially cheaper than employing a human person. Now, this isn't new. Fans of the game Victoria 3, people like me that is, will know that mechanization and automation is brought in to reduce the amount of human labor needed to produce either the same amount or more of the particular product you're making. The ones among you who think they're being clever might be about to say, "Ha! You really are just trying to defend your job and are being anti-tech because you're a selfish bastard who doesn't want humanity to ascend to the cloud," or something. I don't know. I don't know what you guys are like. And first of all, why wouldn't I want to defend my conditions and income? And why wouldn't I be resentful of a technology that produces inferior work? Automating drudgery is at least something I can understand. I think today if you said agriculture should be demechanized and be more labor intensive, people might look at you like you've just grown horns out of your head. To take the agriculture example further, farming is necessary labor, and doing it more efficiently is something that's at least plausible to argue for, because hand plowing a field sucks. It's shitty, back-breaking work. I mean, I assume it is. I've never had to do it because of labor specialization, and I don't think many people in the UK are hand plowing fields, but I have to assume it's not very fun. We have expanding precarity for people who we would typically see as immune to that. Then we have people who work in creative industries. These are already industries that were precarious, and it was easy to make them precarious, I believe, in part because people do not see creative work as the equivalent to, like, bricklaying. AI has become such an issue that it was even a big component of the SAG-AFTRA strike. And I get it. You're going to say that it's hard to be sympathetic for people who get to make money pretending to be someone else. And, you know, some actors end up being rich and famous, so who really cares about them? But consider that acting and creative work is work, and I like watching TV shows that aren't dog shit. Well, kind of, no accounting for taste, but most of the time, that's what I like. Also, those actors that you could name off the top of your head who are really rich and famous, they're at the top of an extremely narrow pyramid, and a lot of them had the basic wherewithal to sort of stand with their less fortunate colleagues, which, you know, I lived for that clip of Rod Perlman threatening a studio exec. It's just perfection. I loved it. That's just to give you a sense of how broad the potential impact is. If we're saying tech workers and actors have to be concerned about this, then there's a pretty good chance that some exec who's a higher up at where you work is thinking about how to use AI to replace you. And if AI is allowed to proliferate in a way similar to how it's proliferated so far, with largely the same scam artists as crypto backing it, with large companies integrating it into things that it doesn't need to be in, with potentially your boss looking at it as a replacement for your work, and with it producing absolute fucking trash, I cannot emphasize this enough. The output is mostly awful and generative AI is deeply limited. But if you're thinking that we've seen all of this before, it's because we have. Do you remember Smarter Child? I mean, if you're my age, you might do. The chatbot that would be on MSN Messenger. I think that's just me remembering anyway. It was a part of a wave of AI nonsense in the 2000s, and this was going to automate customer service jobs, and surprise, surprise, it was all fucking awful. So what we're really seeing is the tech industry version of new metal being back in fashion. It is back. I hope it's back in fashion anyway. AI has also contributed through its garbage output to the ruining of Google search, with the search engine unable to filter through the sludge that's churned out by these models. Then we're confronted with an economic situation that can spiral out of control. There's no guarantee that some kind of bullshit job will be made for you to slot into, or that the job will have the conditions that you currently enjoy. Some, like the French presidential candidate in 2017, Benoit Hamon, suggested a robot tax which would tax the wealth created by the replacement of human labour, which some might say is a rather Luddite policy, but I do mean that as a compliment, even if I think Hamon was vastly superior to Jean-Luc Mélenchon, but that's a sort of separate issue that we can argue about on another day. There is something else I find rather difficult to accept in all this, particularly as it relates to creative endeavours like writing and drawing. I could understand, like I said, automating boring shit like ploughing a field, or even coding, but I incidentally think that the use case in coding is a little limited and requires a person who can code to oversee it. But let's be honest, it is boring. I can't understand wanting to make art the domain of the machines. Like, what kind of soulless entity must you be to think art? That's the thing that humans shouldn't be doing themselves. All because some dickheads don't want to pay for commissioned art. Let's have a robot do it for us while humans go to the spreadsheet factory for 8 hours a day, then have to deal with all sorts of bullshit for the remaining time they're awake. The obvious issue with generative AI is something I hinted at earlier. I said that it was trained on datasets. There's nothing necessarily unusual in that. You can see people use machine learning to make a neural network that can drive really fast around a track in Trackmania, which is like training on a dataset, but with a lot of extra programming stuff that, if I'm being honest, I don't understand well enough to explain, so I'll link to a video that describes this in case you are interested in it. But generative AI is not trained on a racetrack in a video game. It's trained on material that artists should own the rights to. At least, if we're supposed to believe what we're told about like intellectual property and copyright. Now, I want to get out ahead of a few things here because I can just see it coming and I think it's important to be clear. First, yes, I did do a video about piracy, and yes, I still stand by the things I said in that video, and yes, I still think the costume was a good idea. Second, no, it's not ironic for leftists to defend artists' right to their own work because it's often the only way that they're able to eke out an existence. And third, the people who own and run these models admit it'd be impossible for them to make these generative AIs without training on copyrighted material. Now, you might be wondering, what's the difference between what you did at the start of the video, learning from someone's video, and an AI being trained on an artist's work? Didn't you both try to learn? A rare instance of me quoting my line manager, because this is one of the funniest ways to describe me I've ever heard. The difference is, I have human intelligence. I mean, maybe that's up for debate to some extent, but fundamentally, I will take the skills that I learned to draw the things that emerge from my own creativity, original work born of my own mind. A generative AI does not have human intelligence or its own creativity. It's not making an original work by learning from the dataset. It is directly plagiarizing it. It does not have the capacity for flair or to imagine. This is also where I have to show a little tough love to some people who think typing a prompt and having an AI spit an output is the same as being an artist. I understand that you think this is just a tool and that the subtleties in trying to get these models to make something that matches your vision feels like artistry. I also understand that it's easier than learning to write or draw and cheaper for you than commissioning someone. But it's not being an artist. It's not anywhere near equivalent. All you're doing is using a machine that steals people's work to create a piece of work that an artist, a real artist, could have made to match that vision in your mind in a more satisfying way. There are even darker manifestations of this technology. For example, AI has been used to create deepfakes of women, and men too incidentally, that are best described as adult content. Now, I shouldn't need to say it, but I'm going to just in case it's not clear. This is a disgusting violation of consent, and if you need this explained to you, I can't really see how I could explain it to you without being really patronizing. I mean, there was at least one Star Trek episode about this. I believe it's Galaxy's Child. I think it's Next Generation. Could be wrong, but there'll be a clip of it playing over this. Like, if Star Trek has, squared this away in the early 90s, I think we can sort of accept that this is the case now. There was, of course, the famous incident of a streamer getting caught with this kind of content open on their stream, which resulted in one of the most bizarre YouTube apologies of recent memory. And no, I will not link to it because, oh my god, it has melted my mind. But my general point is that this is not a disaster that's waiting to happen, it's a disaster that's happened. The kinds of avenues this opens are dark and are going to cause anguish to a lot of people. We have a plagiarism machine that also creates revenge porn. Cool. Great. It's almost astonishing to look at all of this and know that in my field, there will be people trying to justify using this technology on the grounds that it's about how you use it and that it's already been made and you can't unmake it. And they're certainly right about that last part. But I came into this thinking that the tech optimists were fools. And I don't think that's sufficient to explain why you would knowingly introduce a at best deeply flawed, unethical technology into your work. Sure, part of it is that the tech industry requires you to be a tech optimist of some kind. And yeah, you can have the occasional tech pessimist on the team, but they're not making the decisions. And this is more of a personal note, but it can be lonely at times to be the person who has to say, yeah, AI is bullshit and it's not going to help me do my job. Obviously, I say that in a more professional way in the office. All of this leads me to the obvious questions. What are you going to do about it? Because it's one thing to know that the thing is bad and to say in kind of a memey way that the Luddites were right. But what does that mean in terms of practical solutions? Firstly, and perhaps most obviously, the Luddites weren't just militant, they were organized. And I know that every other video I seem to make this point, but it really does work. Get organized. If you work in a sector where AI could be introduced, check if you have a recognized union. Failing that, there are other options, plenty of unions out there. But one of the key ways to fight this is going to be through collective resistance. Then there's the tech optimist, or the tech is only evil if you use it for evil thought process, and the idea of proponents of some kind of, tech utopian communism, where we ask, what if we all owned the machine? And it's a tempting thought because often these kinds of questions are ultimately questions of ownership. So if we did own the machine, let me ask you this. Would artists and others be okay with the technology if they were collectively owned? Fundamentally, it's still a plagiarism machine, and the things you would need to do to make it okay would effectively mean that you'll have invented a whole new thing. And probably overthrown capitalism. So we've got to park that thought for like a little while. One thing I found really interesting, and that I think indirectly takes inspiration from the Luddites and their machine breaking campaigns, are tools that artists can use to poison AI that trains on their work. Truly a wonderful way to gain the attention of these people, trying not just to steal your work, but also to change your way of life. A great example of a Luddite group being tech savvy, if you ask me. Seriously though, if for some reason you are an artist and you're watching this, please use these tools and break the machine. And as for the rest of us, remain vigilant and don't use AI. It can't match the kind of creativity you're capable of. And even though I can't draw, I'm determined to keep at it, if only to demonstrate that anyone can do it, because I have such a laughable lack of talent at it. But with that, everyone, I think we can call the video there. If you've enjoyed it, please like, comment, subscribe, all the good usual algorithmy stuff. And I need to thank my proofreader, who's my partner, and my graphics guy, Emma, who I commissioned to make the thumbnail for this video. And it is excellent and better than anything an AI could have produced. You can find Emma's Twitter, X, whatever they're calling it, down below. Commission him. He's very good. I also need to thank my patrons and the one YouTube member, which include Drone Riff, Mercutio, Kazishida, and John N, who are the top tier subscribers on Patreon. If you want a shout out at the end of the video, or you want early access to the videos, or to tell me what to write, or to read the scripts early, or to just have a better idea of what's going on, the Patreon is a great place to go. There's also a Discord where you can get that information. That has a free public bit and also a bit for patrons and subscribers. Also, one YouTube member before I forget, because we love him so much, Nadia Jiwa, if you want kind of the same benefits as close as possible as you get on the Patreon, the YouTube membership thing is probably the best way to go about it if you just happen to prefer that. And I know I'm still working on the badges and the emotes because I need to actually think of what I want some of them to be that aren't just the thoughts of a extremely online brain poisoned person. But with that, everyone, thank you so much if you've made it to the end here. I will catch you all on the next video. Take it easy. See ya. Also, look, the submarine is so good. It's so good. I really like the submarine my partner painted.